The massive space station hung in the void like a silver flower, its petals spinning slowly against the star field. Inside its deepest level, behind walls of reinforced metal and energy shields, sat the most important room in the galaxy. The Council Chamber of Truth housed something that had never been wrong in 3,000 years. The Viridian Truth Engine floated in a tank of blue liquid, its body like a giant jellyfish made of living glass. Thin threads of light pulsed through its transparent flesh, creating patterns that looked almost like thoughts. The creature was as big as a small house, with thousands of hair-thin sensors that could detect the smallest changes in any living being. It could read heartbeats, smell fear, and even sense the tiny electrical sparks that fired in alien brains when they tried to lie. Ambassador Tae-min stepped off the transport shuttle and looked around the docking bay. Everything here was built for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling stretched up so high he could barely see it, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 elephants to walk through side by side. He carried a simple black briefcase and wore his best diplomatic suit, though he had to admit it looked pretty plain next to all the alien technology around him. "Welcome to Station Veritas," said a voice behind him. Tae-min turned to see Chief Interrogator Veltar approaching. The alien looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a tree, if trees had 6 arms and compound eyes the size of dinner plates. Each of Veltar's arms moved independently, making notes on different datapads while he walked. "Thank you for having me," Tae-min replied with a small bow. "Though I have to say, this place makes my office back on Earth look like a closet. A very small closet." Veltar's head tilted in a way that might have been confusion. His translator device hummed for a moment before he spoke again. "You will find our facilities quite adequate for the proceedings. The Galactic Council has spared no expense in creating the perfect environment for truth verification." As they walked through the corridors, Veltar explained the history of the Truth Engine. It had been discovered on a dead world 3 millennia ago, the last survivor of an ancient race that had perfected the art of detecting deception. The Council had spent centuries learning to communicate with it, and in return, it had served as the ultimate judge of honesty in all major galactic disputes. "No being has ever successfully deceived the engine," Veltar said, his pride evident even through the mechanical translation. "Not the silver-tongued merchants of Altair Prime, not the shape-shifting diplomats of the Nexus worlds, not even the hive-mind negotiators who share thoughts across dozens of bodies. The engine sees through all forms of deception." They passed through security checkpoints where other aliens scanned Tae-min with devices that beeped and flashed. A Thrixian guard, looking like a 7-foot-tall lion with armor plating, examined his credentials. A Nexari technician, whose blue-scaled hands moved like liquid mercury, checked his briefcase for weapons or illegal technology. "First human to go through the full process," the Thrixian guard rumbled. "Should be interesting." Tae-min nodded politely. "Well, we humans do like to keep things interesting, sometimes even when we don't mean to." The final corridor led to the Chamber of Truth itself. The room was circular, with walls that curved up into a dome overhead. In the center, the Truth Engine floated in its tank, connected to the room by thousands of fiber-optic cables that carried information faster than light itself. The blue liquid around the creature glowed softly, and Tae-min could see the patterns of light moving through its body like slow lightning. "Magnificent, is it not?" Veltar gestured with 2 of his arms while making notes with the other 4. "The engine reads not just words, but intent. Not just thoughts, but the quantum fluctuations of consciousness itself. It sees the truth that exists in the space between what you think and what you say." Other beings were already present for the trade negotiations. A group of Kelvani delegates stood perfectly still, their stick-like bodies arranged in formation like a living computer. 3 Thrixian warriors sat with their arms crossed, their manes flowing over shoulders broad enough to carry small vehicles. Near the back, a cluster of Nexari representatives whispered to each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes. Each species has already passed through the preliminary screening, Veltar explained. Standard procedure requires all participants to undergo truth verification before negotiations begin. It ensures that everyone speaks with honest intent. Taemin looked around the room and then back at the floating creature in the tank. So, this thing can tell when someone is lying? The engine does not lie or tell truth, Veltar corrected. The engine simply reveals what is real. When you speak a falsehood, your body betrays you in 1,000 ways. Your heart rate changes, your skin temperature shifts, your brain chemistry alters, even your quantum field fluctuates. The engine reads all of these signals simultaneously. That's pretty impressive, Taemin said. Back home, the closest thing we have is when my mother asks if I've been eating properly. She always knows when I lie about that, too. Veltar paused in his note-taking. Your parental unit possesses similar capabilities? Oh no, she just knows me too well. Mothers have their own kind of truth detection. Much scarier than this, actually. The chief interrogator's compound eyes focused on Taemin with something that might have been curiosity. You make reference to fear regarding your maternal figure? Just a joke, Taemin said with a slight smile. Human humor. We tend to exaggerate for comedic effect. Before Veltar could respond, a soft chime filled the chamber. The truth engine's light patterns shifted, becoming more active. The creature's sensors extended toward the gathering like the tentacles of a curious octopus. The engine is ready to begin, Veltar announced to the room. Ambassador Taemin of Earth, please approach the verification platform. Taemin walked to a raised circle in front of the tank. The moment his feet touched the platform, the engine's entire body began to glow brighter. Sensors emerged from hidden panels in the floor and walls, surrounding him with a web of detection equipment that would have made a hospital jealous. State your name and purpose, Veltar instructed, his 6 hands poised over various control panels. Taemin Kim, Earth Diplomatic Corps. Taemin replied clearly. I'm here to negotiate trade agreements between Earth and the Galactic Council, also hoping the cafeteria food is better than what they served on the transport ship, because that was honestly disappointing. The truth engine's light patterns suddenly became erratic. The steady pulse that had marked the previous screenings turned into rapid, chaotic flashes. In the tank, the creature's body contracted and expanded in a rhythm that seemed almost like confusion. Veltar's multiple arms moved frantically over his controls. Curious. The engine is showing unusual readings. Is that bad? Taemin asked, genuinely concerned. Unknown. In 3,000 years of operation, the engine has never displayed this particular pattern. The other delegates began murmuring among themselves in their various languages. The Thrixians leaned forward with interest, while the Nexaris' whispered conversations became more urgent. Taemin looked up at the floating creature, which seemed to be studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. Well, this is either a really good start or a really bad one. Knowing my luck, probably both. The truth engine continued to flash in patterns that made no sense to anyone in the chamber. Veltar's 6 arms moved across his control panels like a pianist playing a very complicated song, but nothing he did seemed to calm the creature down. The blue liquid in the tank began to bubble slightly, and the fiber optic cables connecting to the walls pulsed with warning lights. Perhaps we should begin with simpler questions, Veltar suggested, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. In 3,000 years of working with the engine, he had never seen it react this way to anyone. Taemin stood calmly on the platform, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the light show with mild interest, the way someone might observe an unusual weather pattern. Sure, whatever works best. Though I have to say, if this is how the engine reacts to simple introductions, we might be here a while. The moment he finished speaking, the engine's flashing became even more chaotic. Several of the Nexari delegates stepped backward, their blue scales shifting to a darker shade that indicated worry. "What did the human say to cause such disturbance?" asked Commander J1, the lead Thrixian representative. His massive frame leaned forward, golden eyes focused intently on both Tai-Min and the struggling creature in the tank. Veltar checked his readings again. The ambassador spoke truthfully about his identity and purpose. However, the engine is detecting something else, something it cannot classify. From the observation deck above, technical specialist Mi Kyung watched the proceedings with growing interest. She was one of only 3 humans working on Station Veritas, brought in 6 months ago to help integrate Earth technology with alien systems. Unlike the diplomats and negotiators, she understood both human nature and alien technology well enough to recognize what might be happening. She pressed the communication button on her console. "Chief Interrogator Veltar, request permission to observe the readings directly." "Granted," Veltar replied, grateful for any assistance. "Your human perspective may prove valuable." Mi Kyung studied the data streaming across her screens. The engine was registering truth and falsehood simultaneously, which should have been impossible. Every biological indicator showed that Tai-Min was being honest, but there were additional layers of meaning that the creature could not process. Down on the platform, Tai-Min waited patiently while the aliens tried to figure out what was wrong with their perfect lie detector. He had been in enough tense situations during his years as a prosecutor to know that sometimes the best thing to do was simply wait and let others work through their problems. "Ambassador," Veltar said finally, "I will ask you direct questions. Please answer with simple yes or no responses only." "All right," Tai-Min agreed. "Though I should warn you, I'm not great with simple answers. My ex-wife used to say I could turn 'what time is it' into a philosophy lecture." The engine's glow intensified so much that several delegates had to shield their eyes. The creature's body contracted into a tight ball, then expanded rapidly, as if it were trying to expel something unpleasant. "What is happening?" demanded Kolsan, the senior Kelvani delegate. His species prized logical thinking above all else, and this situation defied all logic. "The engine has never malfunctioned in recorded history." Veltar's compound eyes were wide with something approaching panic. "The readings suggest simultaneous truth and deception, which violates the fundamental laws of information theory." Commander J1 stood up, his 7-foot frame casting a long shadow. "Perhaps the human is using some form of mental shielding technology." "No technological interference detected," Mi Kyung reported from above. "All his equipment checks out clean. This appears to be natural human communication patterns." Tai-Min looked around at all the worried faces. "I'm really not trying to break anything here. Maybe we could try those simple questions you mentioned?" Veltar took what might have been a deep breath, though it was hard to tell with his unusual respiratory system. "Very well. Are you here with peaceful intentions toward the Galactic Council?" "Absolutely," Tai-Min replied without hesitation. "Though I suppose that depends on how you define peaceful. I mean, I did skip breakfast this morning, so I might get a bit cranky during the afternoon sessions. And when I get cranky, I tend to negotiate harder on the coffee quality clauses." The Truth Engine's response was immediate and dramatic. The creature began spinning inside its tank, its light patterns shifting through colors that had no names in any known language. Alarms started going off throughout the chamber, and emergency lights bathed everything in red. "Impossible readings," Veltar announced, his voice tight with confusion. "The engine detects absolute truth in the ambassador's statement of peaceful intent. However, it also detects multiple layers of additional meaning that it cannot interpret." Mi Kyung leaned forward at her console, beginning to understand what was happening. She had grown up in Seoul, just like Tai-Min, and she recognized the subtle patterns of Korean dry humor when she heard them. What the aliens were witnessing was not deception, but something far more complex that their truth detector had never encountered before. "Try another question," she suggested over the intercom. "Something more specific." Veltar nodded, though he looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ambassador Taemin, do you believe Earth would benefit from these trade negotiations?" "Of course I do," Taemin said. "That's why they sent their most qualified diplomat. By which I mean they sent me, which should tell you something about either Earth's confidence in this deal or their opinion of my other skills. Possibly both." This time, the Truth Engine's reaction was even more violent. The creature pressed itself against the walls of its tank, its sensors retracting as if it were trying to hide from something. The blue liquid began to churn like a storm, and several of the fiber optic cables sparked and went dark. "Emergency protocols activated," announced the station's computer system. "Truth Engine showing signs of severe distress. Medical team to Chamber 1 immediately." Alien medics rushed into the room, their various appendages carrying devices that looked like a cross between medical scanners and gardening tools. They aimed these at the tank, taking readings on the engine's condition. "Neural pathways showing signs of overload," reported the chief medic, a being that looked like a walking flower with too many eyes. "The creature is experiencing something equivalent to a severe headache." Commander Jae-won turned to stare at Tai-min with new interest. "Human, what manner of warrior are you to wound the engine without weapon or hostile intent?" "I'm not a warrior at all," Tai-min replied, looking genuinely concerned about the creature's welfare. "I'm just a guy trying to do his job, though apparently I'm not very good at it if I'm giving ancient alien lie detectors mental breakdowns just by talking." The engine pulsed weakly, as if even this self-deprecating comment was too much for it to handle. Mi Kyung watched the readings spike again and made a decision. "Chief Interrogator, I request permission to speak with Ambassador Taemin privately. I believe I understand what is causing the engine's distress." "Granted immediately," Veltar said, relief evident in his voice. "Any insight would be most welcome." As Mi Kyung prepared to leave her observation post, she reflected on the irony of the situation. The galaxy's most sophisticated truth detection system was being defeated not by lies or deception, but by the most human trait of all, the ability to be completely honest while also being sarcastic about it. The Truth Engine, floating in its tank, had spent 3,000 years learning to detect every form of deception known to galactic civilization. But no one had ever taught it how to handle a species that could tell the truth and make fun of themselves at the same time. Mi Kyung hurried down from the observation deck while the medical team continued working on the distressed Truth Engine. The creature had stopped its violent spinning, but was now pulsing with weak, irregular lights that reminded her of a dying light bulb. She could see Taemin standing awkwardly on the platform, surrounded by increasingly nervous alien delegates who were starting to treat him like a walking weapon of mass destruction. "Ambassador," Mi Kyung said as she approached, "I think we need to talk." Taemin looked relieved to see another human face. "Please tell me you understand what's happening here, because I'm starting to feel like I accidentally declared war by saying good morning." "In a way, you kind of did," Mi Kyung replied. "But not the way you think." Before she could explain further, Veltar approached with all 6 arms, gesturing frantically. "Technical Specialist Mi Kyung, we require immediate assistance. The engine's condition is deteriorating rapidly. If we cannot resolve this situation, we may lose the most important truth detection system in galactic history." Mi Kyung looked at the suffering creature in its tank. "What if I told you the engine isn't malfunctioning? What if it's actually working perfectly, but it's encountering something it was never designed to understand?" "Explain," commanded Kolsan, the Kelvani delegate. His stick-thin body leaned forward with mechanical precision. "The engine detects lies by reading biological and quantum responses to deception," Mi Kyung said. "But what happens when someone tells the truth in a way that sounds like they're not telling the truth, even though they actually are?" Commander Jae-won's golden eyes narrowed. You speak in riddles, human. No, I'm speaking in the same language Taimin has been using this whole time, Mi-kyung said. It's called sarcasm, and it's probably going to revolutionize your understanding of communication. She turned to address the room. May I demonstrate with a few more questions? I promise Ambassador Taemin will try to answer normally. Taemin raised an eyebrow. Define normally. Just be yourself, Mi-kyung said with a slight smile. That's exactly the problem. Veltar looked between the two humans nervously. The engine cannot withstand much more stress. This might actually help, Mi-kyung assured him. Veltar, please ask the ambassador about his qualifications for this position. The chief interrogator consulted his data pad. Ambassador Taemin, do you consider yourself the most qualified human for these negotiations? Taemin thought for a moment. Well, let's see. I have 15 years of diplomatic experience, I speak 4 alien languages, and I've successfully negotiated treaties with 3 different species. So yes, I'd say I'm reasonably qualified. Of course, my main qualification might be that I was the only diplomat available who didn't run away screaming when they heard about the giant alien lie detector. The truth engine's lights began flashing in a completely new pattern, one that looked almost like it was trying to solve a puzzle. The medical team stepped back in surprise as the creature's distress readings shifted to something resembling intense concentration. Fascinating, whispered Dr. Sang-ho, the chief medic. The engine appears to be attempting to adapt its neural pathways. Mi-kyung nodded. It's trying to understand how someone can tell the complete truth while also making jokes about themselves. Taemin really is qualified. Everything he said was accurate, but he also acknowledged the absurdity of the situation with humor. This concept of humor is causing the malfunction? Asked Veltar. Not malfunction, Mi-kyung corrected. Evolution. Ask him about his confidence in the negotiations. Veltar seemed hesitant but continued. Ambassador, are you confident these negotiations will succeed? Absolutely, Taemin replied. I have complete faith in my ability to either reach a beneficial agreement for all parties involved or to spectacularly fail in a way that will be talked about in diplomatic circles for generations. Either way, it should be memorable. The truth. Engine's body began to expand and contract in a steady rhythm, like breathing. New neural pathways were visibly forming in its crystalline structure, glowing threads that branched out in directions that had never existed before. It's learning, Mi-kyung said with wonder. The engine is actually developing new ways to process information. Commander Jae-won stood up suddenly, his warrior instincts alert. Is this dangerous? Are we witnessing the creation of something beyond our control? I don't think so, Mi-kyung said, though she kept her eyes on the readings. I think we're witnessing the birth of true understanding between species. The Nexari delegates had been whispering among themselves in their chime-like voices. Now their spokesperson, a graceful being named Haijin, stepped forward. Our collective consciousness finds this development intriguing. We have always communicated through shared thoughts, where deception is impossible. But this human method suggests that truth itself can have multiple layers. Exactly, Mi-kyung said. Humans don't just communicate facts. We communicate feelings, attitudes, cultural context, and social relationships all at the same time. When Taemin makes a self-deprecating joke, he's not lying about his qualifications. He's being honest about his humanity. Taemin looked around at the assembled aliens with a slight smile. So, you're saying my biggest weakness as a diplomat is actually what makes me human? Your biggest strength, Mi-kyung corrected. You're showing them that being human means being complex, self-aware, and humble all at once. The truth engine suddenly stopped all movement. For a moment, everyone in the chamber held their breath, wondering if the creature had shut down completely. Then, slowly, it began to glow with a warm, steady light that was completely different from anything they had seen before. New neural pathways established, Dr. Sang-ho reported, his flower-like head turning in amazement. The engine has successfully adapted to process multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. Veltar stared at his readings in disbelief. The engine is now detecting not just truth and falsehood, but also context, emotion, cultural significance, and something it's labeling as humor value. Does this mean I can continue with the screening? Taemin asked hopefully. I believe so, Veltar said, though he still looked uncertain. Though I suspect this will be unlike any screening in our history. As if responding to his words, the truth engine pulsed once with what almost looked like anticipation. For the first time in 3,000 years, it was about to encounter something completely new, and instead of fighting it, it was ready to learn. Taemin straightened his tie and smiled. Well then, let's make history. The emergency medical team packed up their equipment, satisfied that the truth engine was no longer in danger of neural collapse. The creature floated peacefully in its tank, occasionally pulsing with soft colors as it continued to process its new understanding of human communication. Mikyung remained near the platform, ready to explain more if needed. Before we continue, Commander Jaewon announced, I would hear more about this human trait called sarcasm. My people value directness and honor above all else. How can words that sound false actually carry truth? Mikyung looked to Taemin, who nodded for her to continue. Think of it as emotional honesty, she explained. When Taemin says something self-deprecating, he's not lying about his abilities. He's being honest about how he feels about the situation he's in. Kolsan, the Kelvani delegate, processed this information with mechanical precision. You are stating that humans communicate internal emotional states simultaneously with factual information? Exactly, Mikyung said. For example, if I said, oh great, another meeting, I would be telling you truthfully that there is indeed another meeting, while also communicating my emotional reaction to having another meeting. The Nexari spokesperson, Hai Jin, seemed fascinated by this concept. Our hive mind communication includes emotional context automatically, but we have never encountered a species that embeds emotion within individual word choices. Dr. Sang-ho, still monitoring the truth engine, added his observations. The engine's new neural pathways are specifically designed to process this layered communication. It appears to be treating human sarcasm as a form of emotional metadata, attached to factual statements. Veltar was taking notes with all 6 hands, trying to document everything for the historical record. This suggests that human communication is far more sophisticated than our initial assessments indicated. Oh, we're very sophisticated, Taemin said with a perfectly straight face. Just ask anyone who's tried to understand our tax codes or assembly instructions for furniture. The truth engine pulsed gently, and Mikyung noticed something interesting in the readings. It's getting better at this. The engine now recognizes that as a joke about human complexity, not an actual claim about superiority. Commander Jaewon leaned back in his chair, a gesture that among his people indicated deep thought. This ability to acknowledge one's own flaws while simultaneously demonstrating competence, there is honor in such honesty. You're starting to understand, Mikyung said. Humans use humor to cope with difficult situations, to build connections with others, and to show that we don't take ourselves too seriously even when we're being serious about our work. A paradox, observed Kolsan. Yet the engine now processes this paradox as a form of truth rather than deception. Dr. Sang-ho looked up from his monitoring equipment. The engine's adaptation appears to be complete. Its stress indicators have returned to normal levels, and the new neural structures seem stable. Mikyung studied the readings on her portable scanner. Actually, I think it's more than stable. I think the engine has evolved into something completely new. It's not just a lie detector anymore. What do you mean? Veltar asked, his compound eyes focusing intently on her. Look at these patterns, Mi-kyung said, projecting her scanner results onto the main display screen. The engine isn't just detecting truth and falsehood anymore. It's analyzing communication styles, emotional contexts, cultural markers, and social intentions. It's become a universal translator for meaning itself. The implications of this hit the room like a wave. For 3,000 years, the truth engine had been used to detect deception. Now it could potentially understand the deeper meaning behind any form of communication from any species. This could revolutionize interspecies diplomacy, He-jin said, her chime-like voice carrying notes of excitement. No more misunderstandings due to cultural differences. Commander Jae-won stood up again, but this time his posture was one of respect rather than suspicion. Human Taemin, you have achieved something remarkable without trying. You have improved upon perfection through simply being yourself. Taemin looked genuinely touched by the compliment. Thank you, Commander. Though I have to say, if being myself counts as an achievement, the bar for human accomplishment has gotten pretty low. Even as he made the joke, everyone in the room could see the truth engine's gentle pulse that indicated it understood both the humor and the genuine gratitude underneath it. May we continue with the screening process? Veltar asked. I am most curious to see how the engine's new capabilities affect the rest of the questioning. Of course, Taemin agreed. Though I should probably warn you that if my regular conversation did this much damage, wait until you hear my negotiating positions. I might accidentally teach your lie detector to play poker. The engine pulsed again, and Dr. Sang-ho laughed. Sound like wind chimes made of flowers. I believe the engine found that amusing. Its humor recognition protocols are definitely functioning. Mi-kyung stepped back to allow the screening to continue, but she kept her scanner ready. What they were witnessing was unprecedented in galactic history. An ancient truth detection system learning to understand not just facts, but the full complexity of intelligent communication. Very well, Veltar said, consulting his list of standard questions. Ambassador Taemin, do you come here with full authority to negotiate on behalf of your species? I do, Taemin replied clearly. Earth's government has given me complete authority to make binding agreements, with the understanding that if I mess this up badly enough, they'll probably disavow all knowledge of my existence and claim I was a rogue agent. Standard diplomatic insurance policy. The truth engine's response was immediate and confident, a steady blue glow that indicated complete truth, with additional harmonics that showed it understood both the formal authority and the informal pressure that came with Taemin's position. Remarkable, Veltar murmured. The engine now provides context along with verification. It's telling us not just that you speak truthfully, but also explaining the cultural and political framework that shapes your truth. Commander Jae-won nodded approvingly. This human shows wisdom in acknowledging the weight of his responsibility while also showing courage in accepting it. Mi-kyung smiled as she watched the readings. The truth engine had not just adapted to understand human communication. It had become something that could help all species understand each other better. And all because one diplomat from Seoul couldn't help but make self-deprecating jokes while telling the absolute truth. I think, she said quietly, this is going to change everything. The screening continued for another hour, with Veltar asking increasingly complex questions about Earth's trade policies, resource availability, and diplomatic intentions. Each time, Taemin answered with his characteristic blend of complete honesty and dry observations about the absurdity of interstellar bureaucracy. The truth engine had settled into a steady rhythm, its new neural pathways growing stronger with each exchange. But then something unexpected happened. Ambassador, Veltar said, consulting a particularly complex section of his notes. There are concerns among some council members about humanity's rapid technological advancement. Some species fear that humans may become a threat to galactic stability. How do you respond to these concerns? For the first time since the screening began, Tae-min was completely silent. He stood on the platform, looking out at the assembled delegates with an expression that was hard to read. The truth engine's gentle pulsing slowed, as if it too was waiting for his response. When Tae-min finally spoke, his voice was different. Gone was the casual humor, replaced by something deeper and more serious. "I understand those fears," he said, quietly. "We humans have a history of being pretty good at finding new ways to hurt each other and ourselves. We've made a lot of mistakes, and some of them were spectacular disasters that nearly ended our civilization." The truth engine's lights began to shift into patterns no one had seen before. The creature's body tensed, as if it were struggling with something difficult to process. "We're imperfect," Tae-min continued. "We're emotional, we're sometimes irrational, and we have this terrible habit of learning our most important lessons the hard way. But here's the thing about humans. We do learn, eventually." The engine's struggling became more pronounced. Dr. Sang-ho hurried to his monitoring station, concern evident in his flower-like features. "The engine is experiencing difficulty processing this information. The complexity is unlike anything we've seen." Mi-kyung watched her readings with growing alarm. "It's trying to analyze multiple layers of truth simultaneously: personal honesty, species-wide self-criticism, historical acknowledgement, hope for the future, fear, pride, shame, all wrapped up in a single statement." Tae-min seemed to sense the engine's distress. He turned to face the tank directly, speaking to the creature as if it were a person rather than a detection system. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I know this is confusing. Humans are confusing, even to ourselves sometimes. We can be ashamed of our past and proud of our progress at the same time. We can admit our flaws while still believing we can do better." The engine's lights flickered weakly, like a computer trying to process too much data at once. "Let me try to explain it differently," Tae-min said, his voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher. "When I make jokes about myself or my species, I'm not being false. I'm being honest about being human, and being human means carrying contradictions." He paused, looking around at the alien faces watching him with fascination and concern. "We know we've made terrible mistakes in our history. Wars, environmental destruction, social injustice. The list is long and painful. But we also know that we've gotten better. We've learned to cooperate instead of just competing. We've learned to explore instead of just conquering. We've learned to ask questions instead of assuming we have all the answers." The truth engine's struggling began to slow. New pathways were forming in its crystalline structure, more complex than anything that had appeared before. "When I joke about human incompetence," Tae-min continued, "I'm acknowledging our limitations, but I'm also showing that we're self-aware enough to recognize those limitations. And that self-awareness is what gives me hope that we can be trusted with the responsibilities that come with joining the galactic community." Commander Jae-won leaned forward intently. "You speak of your species' flaws as if they were strengths." "Not the flaws themselves," Tae-min replied, "but our ability to recognize them, learn from them, and laugh at ourselves in the process. A species that can't acknowledge its own mistakes is a species that will keep making the same mistakes forever." The truth engine suddenly went completely still. For a terrifying moment, everyone thought it had shut down entirely. Then, slowly, it began to glow with a warm, complex light that seemed to contain every color imaginable. "Extraordinary, Doctor," Sang-ho whispered. "The engine has achieved something I've never seen before. It's processing not just individual truth, but philosophical truth. The truth of what it means to be a conscious, growing, learning species." Mi-kyung stared at her readings in amazement. "It's not just understanding sarcasm anymore. It's understanding wisdom." Veltar's 6 hands moved frantically over his controls, trying to document what was happening. The engine is now detecting layers of meaning that exist at the level of species consciousness itself. It's reading the truth of humanity as a whole through the words of one individual. Hey Jin, speaking for the Nexari Collective, said softly, "We have shared thoughts across our entire species for millennia, yet we have never achieved such clarity of self-understanding as this human demonstrates." Taemin looked up at the transformed truth engine with something approaching awe. "Did I just break it again?" "No," Mi-kyung said, her voice filled with wonder. "I think you just taught it what it really means to tell the truth." The engine pulsed once, gently, and somehow everyone in the room understood that it was saying, "Thank you." Kolsan, the logical Kelvani, spoke into the silence that followed. "This human has demonstrated that truth is not merely the absence of falsehood. Truth can be complex, layered, and even contradictory while still being fundamentally honest. The engine has learned something that we, in 3,000 years, never taught it," Veltar said quietly. "It has learned that the deepest truths often come wrapped in complexity, doubt, and humility." Taemin straightened his tie and smiled slightly. "Well, if we're done breaking ancient alien technology with the power of human neuroses, maybe we can get on with saving the galaxy through proper trade negotiations." The truth engine pulsed with what could only be described as gentle amusement, and everyone in the room realized that something fundamental had changed. The creature was no longer just a detector of lies and truth. It had become something that could understand the full spectrum of intelligent communication. Not just what beings said, but what they meant, felt, hoped, and feared. And it had learned all of this from one human who couldn't help but tell the truth about being human. 3 months later, the news of what happened in the Truth Chamber had spread across the entire galaxy. The Galactic Council's most trusted lie detector had evolved into something unprecedented, a universal communication translator that could understand not just words, but meaning, context, emotion, and cultural significance across all known species. Taemin sat in his new office aboard Station Veritas, reviewing the final trade agreements that had been signed just that morning. The negotiations had taken longer than expected, but they had been the most successful in Council history. For the first time, every species involved felt they truly understood what the others were offering and asking for. A gentle chime announced a visitor. Mi-kyung entered, carrying a data pad and wearing the insignia of her new position as Director of Interspecies Communication Studies. "How's our patient today?" Taemin asked, gesturing toward the chamber below where the truth engine continued its work. "Fascinating as always," Mi-kyung replied. "This morning it helped resolve a dispute between the Altarian merchants and the Centauri Mining Consortium. Apparently what the Altarians call enthusiastic negotiation, the Centaurians were interpreting as hostile aggression. The engine was able to translate the cultural context, so both sides understood what was actually being communicated." Taemin smiled. "Good to know I'm not the only one who confuses aliens with my communication style." Through the office windows, they could see the truth engine in its chamber. The creature had grown noticeably larger over the past months, its neural networks more complex and colorful than ever before. It was currently working with a group of young diplomats from various species, teaching them how to recognize and interpret different forms of cultural communication. "The Council has officially renamed it," Mi-kyung said. "It's no longer the Truth Engine. They're calling it the Understanding Engine now." "That's appropriate," Taemin agreed, "though I still can't believe all this happened because I couldn't resist making jokes during what was supposed to be a formal screening." Dr. Sang-ho appeared in the doorway, his flower-like head swaying with excitement. "Ambassador Taemin, I have remarkable news. The engine has made another breakthrough." They followed the doctor down to the chamber, where Commander Jae-won was standing before the tank with what appeared to be a young Thrixian warrior. The younger alien looked nervous, while Jae-won appeared to be giving some kind of instruction. "What's happening here?" Mi-kyung asked. "Young warrior Kyung-soo is about to undergo his first diplomatic mission," Jae-won explained. Traditionally, we prepare for such missions through combat training and honor codes. But the engine suggested something different. The engine made a suggestion? Taemin asked, surprised. Oh yes, Dr. Sang-ho said proudly. It's become quite conversational over the past month. It suggested that warrior Kyung-soo might benefit from learning human-style self-awareness before his mission. They watched as the young Thrixian approached the platform nervously. His mane was perfectly groomed, his posture rigidly formal in the traditional warrior stance. State your readiness for diplomatic service, the engine's voice came through the chamber speakers. Over the months, it had developed the ability to speak directly rather than just providing readings through instruments. I am fully prepared, Kyung-soo replied stiffly. I have studied all protocols and committed the honor codes to memory. And how do you feel about this preparation? The engine asked gently. The young warrior paused, clearly confused by the question. Feel? I am a warrior. I am prepared. Try answering the way Ambassador Taemin might, the engine suggested. Be honest about your internal experience as well as your external readiness. Kyung-soo looked around the chamber uncertainly, then seemed to make a decision. I am prepared according to all traditional measures. I know the protocols, the honor codes, and the proper forms of address. I am also completely terrified that I will somehow dishonor my people by accidentally starting a war because I don't understand some subtle cultural cue that everyone except me thinks is obvious. The engine pulsed with warm, encouraging colors. Excellent. Now, you are truly prepared. Commander Jaewon looked stunned. The engine taught him to acknowledge fear as a form of wisdom? Not just fear, Mi Kyung realized. Self-awareness, humility, the recognition that being prepared includes being aware of what you don't know. Taemin watched the young warrior with approval. And being honest about your limitations is the first step toward overcoming them. This is what you taught the engine, Dr. Sang-ho said to Taemin. That true strength comes from understanding your own weaknesses. Over the following weeks, the Understanding Engine began working with delegates from across the galaxy. It helped the logical Kelvani understand the emotional undertones in other species' communications. It taught the honor-focused Thrixians to recognize when other cultures used humor to show respect rather than disrespect. It showed the collective-minded Nexari how individual consciousness could be just as valid as shared thought. Most remarkably, it helped humans understand themselves better, too. A steady stream of Earth diplomats came to learn from the engine, discovering that their own complex communication styles were not flaws to be hidden, but strengths to be understood and used wisely. 6 months after the first meeting, Taemin stood before the full Galactic Council to deliver his final report on the trade negotiations. The agreements had been so successful that they were being used as a template for future deals between all Council species. The human delegation has exceeded all expectations, announced Chancellor Veltar, who had been promoted following the success of the Understanding Engine project. Not only have they negotiated beneficial trade terms, but they have revolutionized our approach to interspecies communication. Taemin stepped up to the podium, looking out at representatives from dozens of worlds. Thank you, Chancellor. Though I have to say, calling it a revolution makes it sound much more intentional than it actually was. Mostly, I just showed up and talked like a normal human being. The fact that this broke your lie detector and accidentally created a new form of diplomatic technology says more about the power of honest communication than it does about any special skill on my part. The Understanding Engine, now permanently installed in the council chamber, pulsed with gentle amusement. Several alien delegates made sounds that their species used for laughter. The engine agrees with Ambassador Taemin's assessment, Chancellor Veltar announced. It has informed us that the ambassador's greatest diplomatic tool is his refusal to be anything other than authentically human. And what does that mean exactly? Asked Councillor He-jin from the Nexari delegation. The engine's voice filled the chamber, warm and wise. It means being honest about complexity. It means acknowledging flaws while still believing in the possibility of growth. It means finding humor in difficulty and hope in uncertainty. It means telling the truth not just about facts, but about what it feels like to be alive, conscious, and trying to do better. Commander J1 stood up, his massive frame radiating respect. The engine speaks wisdom. Perhaps all species could benefit from learning to be more authentically themselves. As the council session ended, Tae-min walked back to his quarters, reflecting on everything that had changed. A simple diplomatic mission had turned into something much larger. Proof that understanding between different forms of consciousness was not only possible, but could lead to growth and evolution for everyone involved. His final report to Earth was brief and characteristically modest. Mission accomplished. Trade agreements signed successfully. Also accidentally taught an ancient alien lie detector to understand sarcasm, which apparently counts as a major diplomatic breakthrough. Still not sure how that happened, but I'm told it's a good thing. Recommend sending more humans who are comfortable being human. Turns out the galaxy needed us to be ourselves more than we needed to be perfect. The Understanding Engine reading. The report through the station's communication systems pulsed once with what could only be described as fondness. It had learned much about truth from the humans, but perhaps the most important lesson was that the truth was always more interesting than perfection. And in chambers across the galaxy, as the Understanding Engine's influence spread, beings from countless worlds were learning that sometimes the most profound truths came wrapped in the simple honesty of admitting that nobody, not even ancient alien lie detectors, had all the answers. They were all just doing their best, and somehow that was enough.